For millennia, we have journeyed from instinct to reason. This path culminated in the Age of Enlightenment, a radical shift that taught us to trust logic, to dissect the world, and to look outward for answers. Our ancestors lived by impulse. They did not think about their actions. They simply acted. Thought forms, universal gestures, and deep-seated attitudes follow patterns established long before reflective consciousness dawned within us. It is a humbling thought. People don't always have ideas. Sometimes, ideas have people. In our modern, rational, and intensely material world, we have gained much, but we have also deprived ourselves of something essential. We have turned away from our inner world, the unconscious. This is not a primitive realm to be feared, but the very root of our being. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung recognized this great one-sidedness. Our modern mind looks only externally, valuing what can be measured and proven, while quietly starving the part of us that dreams, that intuits, that knows in symbols and stories. This does not mean we must abandon reason. It means we must restore a dialogue. We must reconnect with the unconscious so that it can inform our conscious life. This dialogue happens in the language of the psyche, through dreams, myths, symbols, and rituals. As Jung said, the dream is a little hidden door in the innermost secret recesses of the soul. It opens into that cosmic night, which was psyche long before there was any ego consciousness, and which will remain psyche, no matter how far our ego consciousness extends. In his mid-50s, Jung discovered alchemy. It was considered a pseudo-science, a forgotten relic, a despised field of investigation, yet he devoted the remaining 30 years of his life to studying it, practically digging it up from the dunghill of the past. He revived it because he saw in it a profound truth. Alchemy was anything but nonsense. The alchemists were early explorers of reality, using theory, experiment, and equipment to understand the nature of matter and spirit. To dismiss them as unscientific is an anachronism. It judges the past by rules it did not yet know. Alchemy can be approached in different ways. Historians of science see it as the predecessor of chemistry, stripping away the symbolic and mythical to focus on chemical operations, discoveries, and equipment. And indeed, from alchemical experiments came chemically pure substances, glass, perfumes, paints, gunpowder, and the distillation of alcohol. The very word chemistry derives from alchemy. Historians of religion, on the other hand, focus on the rites, myths, and symbols. But Jung's focus was psychological. For him, the rediscovery of alchemy became a vital part of his work as a pioneer of psychology. By his 50s, he had already developed the core of analytical psychology, psychological types, complexes, archetypes, synchronicity, the collective unconscious, the self, and individuation. He was now seeking comparative material, external echoes to validate and amplify what he observed within his patients. He called this the method of amplification, using alchemical, mythological, and religious parallels to turn up the volume on unconscious material. In alchemy, he found the missing link. It formed a bridge between the ancient Gnostic traditions and the modern psychology of the unconscious. He discovered that the strange, intricate symbols in ancient alchemical texts were not arbitrary. They were tackling the very same processes he was grasping for in his work, and they were strikingly similar to the dream images of his patients. He came to believe these symbols were spontaneous products of the collective unconscious, appearing to the tormented, searching souls of the alchemists, who were, in a sense, the precursors to his own psychology. Jung's introduction to alchemy came through a friend who sent him an ancient Taoist text, The Secret of the Golden Flower. In its pages, he recognized a method for reuniting what had been separated, consciousness and the unconscious. The goal was psychic wholeness through a union of opposites, what Jung would call the self. This alchemical idea of unity would occupy him for the rest of his life. But before we delve into the operations and symbols of alchemy, we must first understand the idea of wholeness. We are all born whole, but as we develop a sense of I, of ego, we fragment. The first half of life is often about ego self-separation, building our identity, our place in the world. The second half of life, if we are fortunate, becomes about ego self-reunion. There is a line, an axis, connecting the ego with the self, like a channel. Jung wrote that the self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality. Just as the ego is the center of consciousness, when the ego becomes the sole source of identity, we disregard the other half of our personality, the unconscious. The result is one-sidedness, a kind of psychic dissociation. Our task, then, is to recover our original unity, the original wholeness we knew as infants, before the ego solidified. To become like a child again is not a regression. It is a recovery of unity, a rediscovery of play, imagination, and the capacity to see the world as animate and full of meaning. As Nietzsche said, the child is the final metamorphosis to becoming who we truly are. The child is innocence and forgetfulness, a new beginning, a game, a self-propelling wheel, a first motion. A sacred yes, play is an essential part of life, subtly pushed into the background as we grow up and develop our serious, ego-driven personas, yet we unconsciously long for it. Jung wrote that the dynamic principle of fantasy is play. Without playing with fantasy, no creative work has ever yet come to birth. The debt we owe to the play of imagination is incalculable. Integrating this inner child leads to a heightened state of consciousness, one we did not possess when we were born. We are born integrated. We disintegrate, and we must reintegrate. That is the process of self-realization. There is no integration without disintegration. Wholeness is achieved through constant inner work. An alchemical saying advises, only after 100 days of consistent work, only then is the light genuine. Only then can one begin to work with the spirit fire. This light is an acute state of consciousness that uncovers areas of the unconscious, usually left in darkness. But as Jung noted, it is pointless to praise the light and preach it if nobody can see it. It is much more needful to teach people the art of seeing. The path to wholeness is not linear. It is a process of circumambulation, circling around the center. Everything relates to the center. Jung wrote, I began to understand that the goal of psychic development is the self. There is no linear evolution. There is only a circumambulation of the self. This insight gave him stability. In finding the mandala as an expression of the self, he felt he had achieved the ultimate. To be in the center is to be relieved from the anxiety, suffering, and hopelessness that cling to the rim of the wheel, the temporal concerns of money, pleasure, fame, and power. A medieval manuscript shows a king living on the rim of a wheel. It moves in a never-ending cycle. I am reigning, I have reigned, I have lost my kingdom, and I shall reign in. The center of that wheel is a figure of Christ, a symbol for the self. To be in the center is to experience a kind of ecstasy, standing outside of oneself without ceasing to be oneself. The ancient Greek philosophers called this state apatheia, not apathy, but a state of wisdom and tranquility. It is being undisturbed by wild emotional fluctuations, indifferent to the slings and arrows of fortune, going along with whatever life brings, by observing what actually happens, rather than our perception of what happens. we can calm the inner tornado. The Stoics practiced the dichotomy of control. Focus on what is in your control. Let go of what is not. This state is not permanent, that would be superhuman. It is a temporary grace, more accessible to those who are in tune with their soul. For Jung, this is the alignment of one's ego to the self, the source of spiritual nourishment. It is characteristic of the archetype of the wise old man or woman. Others are more afflicted by anxiety because they live on the rim, where life becomes a vicious cycle. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. To be alone with oneself can lead to solitariness in the positive sense, or loneliness in the negative. As the saying goes, if you're lonely when you're alone, you're in bad company. Spending time alone with oneself and one's unconscious is a rich source of spiritual nourishment. It is key to self-realization. It is only by confronting our unconscious that we can become whole. Jung believed that as a doctor, his task was to help the patient cope with life. But the highest and most decisive experience was for the patient to be alone with his own self, to find out what supports him when he can no longer support himself. Only this experience can give an indestructible foundation. With this notion of wholeness, we can now turn to the origins and history of alchemy. The word alchemy is of uncertain origin. It may derive from the Arabic alchemy, with all meaning the root may come from the old name for Egypt, Kemet, the black lands, the fertile soil along the Nile, distinct from the red desert. So, alchemy can be seen as the Egyptian art, the black art. Others believe it comes from the Greek chimera, meaning to cast together or to pour together. The term may well be a mix of these sources. It is unclear where alchemy first appeared, whether in Egypt, China, India, or somewhere in the Middle East. Many of these cultures exchanged beliefs and knowledge along the Silk Road, which was also an intellectual route, but many scholars trace it back to Egypt. The pre-Socratic Greek philosophers dealt primarily with rational thought and natural principles. They came up with basic concepts still valid in physics: matter, space, time, the atom. They sought to understand the world through the four elements: fire, water, air, and earth. But they did few experiments. The Egyptians, on the other hand, were intensely practical with matter. Their enormous energy was directed toward life after death. Their main concern was performing the right rituals to assure eternal life. For them, the distinction between matter and spirit was not clear. If you were to have eternal life, you needed a body that would live forever, hence mummification. The main chemical procedure was bathing the corpse in a base of sodium bicarbonate. The root of the Latin word for sodium, natrium, is the Egyptian word ntr, meaning God. So, mummification meant bathing the corpse in God's substance, till it was completely soaked in it. As such, one became eternal, identical with the cosmos. The trends of Greek and Egyptian civilization came together in a fruitful marriage, and alchemy was their child, a hybrid of Greek philosophy and Egyptian material transformation and symbolism. The central figure in alchemy is Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes. His name derives from the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek god Hermes, messenger of the gods and guide of souls. The philosophy of Hermes is Hermeticism, and he is the author of the Emerald Tablet, said to contain all the knowledge of alchemy in a few lines. It is the source of the most important alchemical maxim: as above, so below. The inner world, the microcosm, and the outer world, the macrocosm, are one and the same. As within, so without. The immortal realm of the inner world corresponds to the physical reality of the outer world. Through transforming ourselves, we transform the world. Through transforming the world, we transform ourselves. Human consciousness expands to embrace cosmic consciousness. The drop returns to the ocean, the spark to the flame. The history of alchemy can be divided into three main phases. Hellenistic alchemy, from about 200 BC to 600 AD. Arabic alchemy, extending to about 1000 AD. And Latin alchemy, continuing from about 1100 to 1700 AD. This history went through its own process of death and rebirth. By 600 AD, alchemy as a spiritual discipline began to die out in the West. It was revived during the Muslim conquests, when Arabs discovered Greek and Egyptian texts. The Sufis were particularly interested, writing about imagination and visionary states. The most famous Arab alchemist was Jabir ibn Hayyan. Alchemy faded again until the Crusades, when Crusaders brought the texts back to Europe, starting the Latin period. One famous alchemist of this time was Paracelsus, more concerned with the medical and practical side. Around the 1700s, the scientific method was born, and alchemy was branded as fraud and heresy. People turned toward the rationalist world of modernity. Yet, even Isaac Newton studied alchemy for most of his life, producing 1,000,000 words on the subject. After his death, most were burned to protect his reputation. It wasn't until the 20th century that Jung brought alchemy back to life as psychology. Alchemy is popularly known as the art of transmutation, most notably turning lead into gold, a process called chrysopoeia. Gold making. Lead was seen as the basis metal, dull, soft, useless, poisonous. There are 7 primary metals in alchemy, each with a planetary influence: gold Sun, silver Moon, copper Venus, iron Mars, tin Jupiter, Mercury, and lead Saturn. For the Hindus, these correspond to the 7 chakras. Whether alchemists ever produced artificial gold is unknown. But for Jung, the task was always psychological. The end product is not material, but spiritual. Alchemy is the art of expanding consciousness, of self-realization. An alchemical text declares, "Transform yourselves from dead stones into living philosophical stones." The spiritual alchemist often concealed the truth intentionally. This was to prevent the greedy or the unprepared from accessing its wisdom without inner work, and also to shield themselves from persecution by religious authorities. The truth was hidden in symbols, in paradoxes, in a maze of words. Alchemists were concerned with transforming the lowest kind of matter, rotten flesh, urine, poison, filth, into the highest, gold. This base matter is called the prima materia, the first matter, the one substance that makes up everything in the universe. Psychologically, it can be defined as our very consciousness. A famous alchemical saying is, in sterquilini's invenita in filth, it will be found. That which you most value is found in the least likely places. The prima materia expresses itself in a trinity, the tria prima. These were given code names: sulfur soul, mercury spirit, and salt body. They compose everything. In the alchemical art of spagyrics, which means to separate and recombine, the alchemist would transform a plant. Distillation would yield essential oil, the soul. Fermentation would create liquor, the spirit. Burning the plants would yield ash, which when washed and evaporated would leave salt crystals, the body. This shows how seriously the alchemists considered the connection between inner and outer worlds. For them, the body was all the material that composes reality. The spirit is the mind, the bridge between body and soul, and the soul is the cause of everything. In short, alchemy is the understanding of how the unconscious spirit relates to consciousness body, resulting in the total personality, the self-soul. To understand reality, one must understand the prima materia by breaking it into parts and reuniting them in a new way. a new substance is created. This involves changing the elements and their qualities. This principle is known as solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. It is identical to the meaning of spagyrics. The goal is to create the lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, the central symbol of alchemy. It is the substance that acts as a catalyst, turning base matter into gold. Obtaining the stone is the opus magnum, the great work. The alchemists believe the work proceeds from the One and leads back to the One. This is expressed in a famous axiom, a recurring theme symbolizing wholeness. One becomes two becomes three, and out of the third comes the One as the fourth. This is the essence of the philosopher's stone, symbolized by the squared circle. The stone is sometimes described as producing the universal panacea curing all disease, the alkahest a universal solvent, the Holy Grail granting eternal youth, and the elixir of life granting immortality. Ironically, many Chinese emperors seeking immortality died from drinking such elixirs. These ideas are to be taken as metaphors for inner work. There are no shortcuts to self-realization. For Jung, the philosopher's stone is to be found in ourselves. It is the old adage, know thyself. He wrote, the alchemical stone symbolizes something that can never be lost or dissolved, something eternal that some alchemists compared to the mystical experience of God within one's own soul. It usually takes prolonged suffering to burn away all the superfluous psychic elements concealing the stone. A genuinely religious attitude, psychologically speaking, consists of an effort to discover this unique experience and gradually keep in tune with it, so that the self becomes an inner partner toward whom one's attention is continually turned. The psychological significance of alchemy comes from psychological projection. Projection happens unconsciously. We see in the external world what is actually within us. Jung believed the alchemist was naturally unconscious, that his experience had nothing to do with matter itself. He experienced his projection as a property of matter, but what he was really experiencing was his own unconscious. In the darkness of the unknown, the explorer's own psychic background is mirrored. What he sees in matter as the data of his own unconscious, projected outward. This was not intentional. It was involuntary. There is a psychical existence which precedes consciousness. We get messages from this realm through dreams, fantasies, intuitions, visions. From these, we deduce a psychical existence totally different from our conscious mind. Thus, alchemy contains an astonishing amount of material from the unconscious, produced in a situation where the conscious mind did not follow a definite program, but only searched. The conclusions are spontaneous. Alchemy contains a collection of archetypal symbols with a minimum of personification. To become who we are requires reconnection with the instincts, the unconscious, the mythic world. At the same time, it requires a strong ego to differentiate between daily life and the archetypes of the collective unconscious. One must apply rational thinking and ethical behavior to the products of the unconscious without being overwhelmed by them, but also without ignoring them as meaningless. Closing oneself off from the unconscious also cuts off the energy that flows from these symbols, which can lead to alienation and depression. Meditation, prayer, dream work, these are healing processes that allow us to reintegrate our fragmented selves. This cannot be done by logic alone. It is a participatory, existential mode of being. Jung wrote, the union of opposites on a higher level of consciousness is not a rational thing, nor is it a matter of will. It is a process of psychic development that expresses itself in symbols. The way to lure the unconscious into consciousness is by interacting with symbols, the language of the unconscious. We are constantly surrounded by symbols, though we are less aware of them than our ancestors. Searching for symbols is like fishing in the ocean of the unconscious. Carrying too many will sink your boat. This is ego inflation. Carrying none will leave you empty, without energy. Life becomes colorless, meaningless. Like a fisherman returning home with no fish, the soul remains hungry. Jung developed a technique to engage with symbols called active imagination. He warned, the unconscious has 1,000 ways of snuffing out a meaningless existence with surprising swiftness. The work of the alchemists is filled with symbols. One is the Ouroboros, the tail devourer, a snake eating its own tail. It is the oldest alchemical symbol, representing eternity and endless return, associated with the maxim one is all, and all is one. Sometimes an alchemist would be initiated by a teacher who deliberately confused the student. The teacher would not reveal the secrets directly, because inner work requires the individual to struggle toward realization. If the teacher told all, there would be no transformation. Only detached transmission of knowledge. Gold is the highest value in consciousness, the realization of the self. To reach it, we must first disintegrate our ego consciousness. The one becomes the many. We all have a multiple personality, not in a pathological sense, but in that we have living personalities besides our ego personality. These are the archetypes of the collective unconscious. You see them in your dream figures, which most of the time represent different parts of yourself. So, how does one practice alchemy? There are a number of operations for achieving the philosopher's stone. In his book Anatomy of the Psyche, Edward Edinger distinguishes 7 major operations, using their Latin terms to differentiate the psychological processes from the chemical ones. They are calcinatio, solutio, coagulatio, sublimatio, mortificatio, separatio, and conjunctio. It may look linear, but it is not. It is akin to circumambulation, where operations may repeat. They are steps toward individuation. Fire is central. Alchemy is the art of fire. The first operation is calcinatio, burning a substance to fine ash. Psychologically, it is the burning up of the soul with lust, jealousy, frustration, anger. Fire is active, energetic, instinctual. It is also catharsis, the destruction of the ego and material possessions, a natural humbling process as life's trials assault us. Heraclitus considered fire the first principle, fueling the flame of the heart with right action, thought, and speech increases the power of our divine nature. The fire and the rose are one. Fire burns away errors and lies. Only truth survives. The second operation is solutio, pertaining to water. It is turning solid into liquid, a further dissolution of the ego, an immersion into the dark depths of the unconscious ocean. The third is coagulatio, representing earth turning liquid back to solid. It takes on a fixed, heavy, permanent shape. It is the fall from spirit to flesh, from heaven to earth. Exposing oneself to daily life and hard work solidifies personality. Jung wrote of chopping wood, pumping water, lighting lamps. These simple acts make man simple. And how difficult it is to be simple. It is important to have a strong anchor in reality when interacting with the unconscious. Humility comes from humus, earth. A humble person is down to earth. Human means one who is grounded. The fourth operation is sublimatio, pertaining to air. It turns material into vapor, seen as spirit. It is an elevating process, a low substance translated higher. It is like breathing pure mountain air after a difficult ascent. Gaining psychic objectivity, looking at a problem from above, can make it cease to be a problem. But it is also dangerous. One can be stranded at an unbearable height. One needs both ascent and descent. Nietzsche expressed this. Man is a rope, tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss. An alchemical dictum says, sublimate the body and coagulate the spirit. Upward movement eternalizes. Downward movement personalizes. The Emerald Tablet says, "It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and descends again to the earth, and receives the power of the above and below. Thus you will have the glory of the whole world." The rest of the operations take a different form. During transformation, the alchemists saw stages of color: nigredo blackening, albedo whitening, citrinitas yellowing, and rubedo reddening. Later, yellow fell into disuse, merging with the final stage. The nigredo is spiritual death. Only by courageously letting go of old ideas and limitations can one open the door to new insight. Nietzsche wrote, "The snake which cannot cast its skin has to die," as well as the minds which are prevented from changing their opinions. They cease to be mind. The guide for this is not just life experience, but listening to the unconscious, our ultimate guide. The nigredo represents the fifth operation, mortificatio. We see it in nature: decomposition, falling leaves, rotting fruit where nutrients return to earth. It is matter beginning to die and rot. The nigredo is the most negative stage, a black blacker than black, a place without light. It is the dark night of the soul, a purging of the horrible darkness of our mind. It is represented by the raven, and includes death, suffering, grief, depression, loneliness, weariness of life. It is a crisis of meaning, feeling swallowed by the ground. The state is so unbearable, we numb ourselves with pleasure. When we feel uncomfortable, but don't know why, we are in a state of massa confusione chaos. It is the voice of the unlived life. Paying attention to it, we begin to see things we don't like in ourselves, but these can be very valuable. In this state, ask, what is the next right thing I can actually do? The nigredo is maximum despair, a prerequisite for change. It is separating wheat from chaff. When you come to that loneliness with yourself, you are forced in upon yourself and are bound to become aware of your background. The gateway to peace is narrow, and none may enter save through affliction of the soul. For Jung, the nigredo is confrontation with the shadow. He wrote, "Self-knowledge is an adventure that carries us unexpectedly far and deep." Even a moderately comprehensive knowledge of the shadow can cause a good deal of confusion and mental darkness. At the height of despair, suddenly an illumination can come from above. There is no light without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. To round itself out, life calls not for perfection, but for completeness. And for this the thorn in the flesh is needed. It is the archetype of the wounded healer finding germs of light in the darkness. Jung called this process in antiodromia the union of opposites. The greater the tension, the greater is the potential. Great energy springs from a correspondingly great tension of opposites. Before the albedo, there is a transition, the cauda pavonis, the peacock's tail, where many colors appear. The albedo is the washing away of impurities, a baptism, represented by the dove. This leads to the sixth step, separatio awareness of the opposites, of nigredo and albedo. The albedo is highly prized, the female or moon condition, allowing creation of silver, but some would subject the white matter to another death, turning black once more. If successful, it leads to the final stage. The rubedo.red is associated with the sun, gold, and the philosopher's stone. Seek the coldness of the noon, and ye shall find the heat of the sun. This is the awakening, where the phoenix rises reborn from the fire. We stop fearing darkness once we know the phoenix in us will rise from the ashes. Only that which can destroy itself is truly alive. The red and white are king and queen, sun and moon. They celebrate the hieros gomos, the holy marriage, leading to the final stage, conjunctio. This step was particularly important for Jung. It is the reunification of the prima materia, creating the philosopher's stone. It is the wholeness of the hermaphroditic mercurius, the union of anima and animus, the union of opposites that restores one to the self. Jung wrote, Mercurius stands at the beginning and end of the work. He is the play of colour in the peacock's tail, and the division into 4 elements. He is the hermaphrodite that was in the beginning. He is metallic yet liquid, matter yet spirit, cold yet fiery, poison and yet healing draught, a symbol uniting all the opposites. Alchemy is a process of spiritual death and rebirth. It is the hero's journey we all partake in, the call to adventure, confrontation with our dragon, our worst fear, a difficult quest requiring many attempts. The reward is accessing our inner gold, the psychological death of the old self and birth of a new, more capable self, with an elixir to share with others. The end of the alchemical work was conceived as self-knowledge. Alchemy seeks to heal the suffering of the human soul. A true alchemist seizes the black matter of all existence and makes it something luminous. For this knowledge to be valuable, it must be put into practice. To summarize, calcinatio fire, solutio water, coagulatio earth, sublimatio air, then mortificatio and separatio grado and albedo, and finally conjunctio rubedo. This is one of many interpretations, but it serves as a solid introduction. In an image called the Mountain of the Adepts, we see the process of psychological development analogous to alchemical transformation. The philosopher's stone is a temple of the wise buried in the earth. The phoenix straddles the sun and moon. The zodiac symbolizes the duration of the process. The 4 elements indicate wholeness. A blindfolded man represents the stumbling search for truth. The right way is shown by the investigator following his natural instincts. An old alchemist gave this consolation to a disciple. No matter how isolated you are and how lonely you feel, if you do your work truly and conscientiously, unknown friends will come and seek you. And so the work continues, not in a laboratory of glass and flame, but in the quiet chamber of the heart. The lead of our confusion, the base matter of our suffering, is not an error to be discarded, but the very substance of our transformation. When we dare to look into the blackness, to dissolve in the waters of uncertainty, to be grounded by humble tasks, to glimpse the view from above, and to endure the necessary deaths of the self, we are not merely reading about an ancient art. We are performing it. The gold we seek is not at the end of the process, but is the process itself, shining back at us from the depths of our own being. The stone is not out there. It is the quiet, enduring center you carry within. And the great work is simply this, to remember and to return.